January 12, 1945, north of Zutphen, Netherlands. Inside a cold, gray holding area, a small group of German women huddled together. Their wrists bore the harsh imprint of chains, each metal link biting into raw skin. Liesel Bauer, 34, Erika Hoffman, 29, pressed her hands against her chest, as if holding herself together from the inside. For months, whispers moved quietly through the barracks. Stories no one wanted to hear, but everyone feared were true. Assaults, threats, cruelty from soldiers meant to guard them. Some nights, Liesel cried herself to sleep, wishing for death over humiliation. Erika carried memories heavier than iron. Silent scars no chain, no officer, no barracks could erase. Then, the Canadian soldiers came. The cold did not ease when the chains were removed. Winter still pressed against stone walls and frozen ground. But something had changed. The women remained still at first, as if movement itself might bring punishment. Canadian boots moved carefully across the floor. No shouting, no insults, no raised rifles. Only quiet commands, spoken low. Metal clinked once, then again. A chain loosened, another followed. Liesel felt the weight leave her wrists, not all at once, but link by link. Her hands trembled, not from the cold, from disbelief. She flexed her fingers slowly, as if relearning their purpose. Erika leaned back against the wall, her shoulders collapsing inward. Tears welled, blurring the harsh gray room. No one cheered, no speeches were made. A Canadian guard met her eyes and gave a small nod. Nothing more. For months they had been treated as objects, controlled, measured, handled. Now they were simply seen. A corporal knelt, unlocking the final restraint. His voice was low, steady. "You're not a monster." The words did not echo, they settled. Something fragile shifted in the air, like ice beginning to crack, not loudly, but enough to be felt. For the first time in a long while, the women breathed without fear of what might follow. Morning came without warmth. The sky stayed low and gray, the wind sharp against exposed skin. Captain James O'Connor stood in the open air, watching the women from a distance. He was young for command, but war had already aged him. His men had followed orders, the camp was secured, the prisoners were compliant. Still, the chains lingered in his mind. He saw them not as equipment, but as weight, each link carrying months of fear. The women did not meet his eyes. They stood guarded, braced for cruelty that did not come. O'Connor studied their posture, the way shoulders curled inward, the way hands stayed close to the body. He had read the reports. He had heard the rumors. None of it sat easily. We can't undo what was done, he thought, but we can decide what happens now. There was no order from above for mercy, no instruction manual for decency. This decision belonged to him. He turned slightly toward his men. His voice was calm, controlled. Remove the restraints. No hesitation followed. The soldiers moved without ceremony, working quickly, deliberately. Metal hit the ground, dull and final. The sound carried weight. Not victory, not surrender, recognition. O'Connor watched closely, not to enforce discipline, but to ensure respect. This was not propaganda, not theater. It was a line being drawn. Not here, not under our watch. As the last chain fell, he understood something war rarely taught. Authority could command obedience, but humanity commanded something far stronger. The chains fell to the floor one by one. Not loudly, not dramatically, just enough sound to be remembered. Liesel looked down at her wrists, red, swollen, marked by months of metal and cold. She turned her hand slowly, as if expecting the chains to still be there. They weren't. Her fingers shook as she flexed them, testing a freedom she had nearly forgotten existed. Across the room, Erica sank against the wall. Her strength gave way all at once. Tears welled in her eyes, not sudden, but heavy, as though they had been waiting a long time. The walls remained gray, the air remained cold, but the room felt different. No shouting followed, no punishment, no threat. The Canadian guards moved on quietly, their work finished, their presence steady but distant. For months, the women had been counted, processed, controlled, not spoken to, not acknowledged. Erica's voice broke the silence, barely above a whisper. For months, for years, we were treated like things. Her breath caught. Not soldiers, not women, just things. A Canadian corporal knelt beside her, unlocking the final restraint from another wrist. His hands were steady, his voice even. "You're not a monster." The words landed slowly. They didn't erase memory. They didn't undo pain. But they named something that had been denied. In that moment, the women were not prisoners. They were not trophies of war. They were human beings again, and the room seemed to know it. Night had always been the worst. In the barracks, darkness did not bring rest. It brought memory. Erica remembered how the walls seemed alive after sunset, how every footstep outside made her body tense. Boots scraping stone, keys rattling, laughter that carried no warmth. She had seen women dragged from their bunks, heard voices raised in threats, felt fear move through the room like smoke. No one screamed. Screaming only made things worse. Liesel remembered the hallways, men passing slowly, eyes lingering too long, hands that touched without permission, voices that mocked, promises that were never promises at all. The chains had been cruel, but they were not the worst part. Fear was worse. Shame was worse. Silence was the heaviest chain of all. Now the metal was gone. Liesel held her hands in front of her, turning them in the light, as if proving to herself they were truly free. Erica drew in a long breath. The air felt different in her chest. Cold, clean, real. For the first time, hope struck her not as comfort, but as shock. Sharp, almost painful. She wanted to believe it was over, that the nightmare had ended. Almost. The memories did not disappear. They waited quietly, like shadows at the edge of a room. But something had shifted. The chains no longer decided who they were. And in that fragile space between fear and belief, the women realized survival had carried them this far. And something new, something dangerous and precious, was beginning to take its place. Freedom of movement was only the beginning. The Canadian officers understood that chains left marks far deeper than skin. So they moved slowly, deliberately. Warm meals arrived at regular hours, not thrown, not rushed. Steam rose from metal trays, filling the rooms with unfamiliar comfort. Blankets followed, proper coats, boots that fit. The women accepted them cautiously, as if kindness itself required permission. Paper and pens were offered next. No orders, no pressure, just the option to write. Some hands hesitated. Some letters began and stopped. Others flowed in silence. Words reconnecting lives thought lost. Books appeared on shelves. Simple lessons, quiet instruction. Not re-education, restoration. Each small gesture worked against years of abuse, undoing damage not with force, but with consistency. Daily walks were introduced, controlled, careful. Captain O'Connor watched from a distance as Liesl and Erica stepped into the courtyard. Their eyes scanned every corner. Their bodies stayed tense. Freedom, learned too quickly, could feel dangerous. Liesl tested the ground beneath her boots. Erica kept her hands close to her chest. Could this be real? Could soldiers be different? No one shouted, no one grabbed. Only quiet supervision, respectful space. Step by step, the women walked farther. Their shoulders lowered slightly, their breath slowed. Trust did not arrive suddenly, it grew, thin as winter sunlight, but steady. And in that cold courtyard, without speeches or promises, humanity began doing its quiet work. The courtyard felt open in a way the barracks never had. Sky above, snow below. Liesl stood beside Erica, their boots leaving shallow prints in the frost. Her voice shook when she finally spoke. "I thought I would never see the sky properly again." She paused. "Never feel safe. Never feel like a person." Erica listened without interrupting. Tears froze along her lashes, turning her blinks slow and careful. "They treat us like people," she said quietly. "Not enemies, not monsters." She swallowed. People. The word felt unfamiliar, heavy, precious. Around them, other women moved cautiously, testing freedom in small ways. A sleeve brushed snow away. A breath was taken without fear. A laugh escaped surprised by itself. Canadian soldiers remained at a distance, present but not pressing. No orders barked. No eyes lingered too long. For the first time, space existed between the women and authority. Liesl looked around the courtyard, the barbed wire still visible, the guards still armed. Nothing had disappeared. And yet something fundamental had changed. Liberation, she realized, was not just the absence of chains. It was recognition, the acknowledgement that their suffering had not erased them, that their fear had not reduced them. For some, the realization came gently. For others, it arrived like a wave, overwhelming, almost unbearable. Erica steadied herself, pressing her boots deeper into the snow. They were alive. They were seen. And in that fragile understanding, the women began to grasp a truth that war had nearly stolen. Their humanity had survived. Winter pressed hard against Camp 30. Snow clung to the fences. Wind cut through wool coats and concrete walls. Inside the compound, the atmosphere had changed, not suddenly, but noticeably. The German women were no longer huddled in silence. They spoke quietly among themselves. Some stood upright now. Others met the guards' eyes without flinching. Canadian officers observed this shift carefully. They understood that trauma does not disappear. It loosens, slowly. Captain O'Connor watched from a distance. He did not interfere. He did not rush the process. The chains had been removed, but the memories remained. Medical staff reported fewer breakdowns. Meals were being eaten more regularly. Sleep, though still fractured, had returned. There were no celebrations, no speeches, only procedure. Canadian policy emphasized control without cruelty, security without humiliation, order without fear. For the women, this was unfamiliar territory, kindness without an agenda, authority without violence. Some tested the boundaries, others remained cautious. All were observing. So were the Canadians. O'Connor understood something essential. Healing does not announce itself. It reveals itself in small details. A steady voice, a lifted head, a step taken without hesitation. War had taught him many lessons. Most involved force. This one did not. Sometimes restraint achieved what weapons could not. Sometimes dignity was stronger than fear. In that frozen camp in Ontario, a quiet transformation was underway. Not victory, not forgiveness, but the first visible crack in wounds that chains alone could never define. The wooden gate creaked open. A small group of women stepped into the snow, hesitant and careful. The world beyond the barracks stretched wide, white, and almost impossible to grasp. Snow reflected the pale winter sun, glinting like fractured glass. Each boot sank slightly into the crisp crust, crunching in rhythm with cautious hearts. Liesel inhaled deeply. The cold air stung, sharp and alive, but it carried a freedom she had almost forgotten. Erica's eyes roamed the horizon. Bare trees etched with frost, birds darting between branches. The simplest details became revelations: wind, light, sound, movement. Chains could bind the body, but not hope. The women moved slowly, testing space and balance, discovering the room to breathe without threat. A pause, a shared glance, small smiles emerging where suspicion had lived. Canadian guards remained at a distance, watchful but unobtrusive, allowing the women to explore their freedom. Liesel's fingers brushed against her coat, feeling fabric instead of iron. Erica pressed her hands to her sides, noticing how small acts of choice felt revolutionary. The snow crunched underfoot, a rhythm of liberation. Step by step, the women reclaimed what had been stolen, their movements careful but deliberate. For the first time in months, they walked as themselves, bodies unshackled, spirits stretching toward light. The winter air carried proof. Chains could not bind the human will. And in that fragile moment, freedom felt real. Not abstract, not promised, but tangible, crisp, cold, and alive. Not all wounds were visible. Liesel sometimes flinched when a hand came too close. Erica lingered apart from the others, haunted by memories she had yet to face. The Canadians understood. Recovery was not immediate. Patience, dignity, and safety were as essential as any weapon. Every small act mattered. A warm meal, a quiet word, a gentle touch. The women were learning that the world could be different, that authority did not always mean cruelty, that fear, though persistent, could be tempered. Liesel flexed her hands in the cold air, noticing how movement no longer caused pain. Erica allowed herself a slow, deliberate breath, feeling the tightness in her chest loosen just slightly. Conversations started softly, almost imperceptibly, between women who had long avoided each other. Shared glances replaced avoidance. The first tentative laughs appeared, small and cautious, echoing faintly through the barracks. Even in the quiet, subtle moments, change was occurring. Chains had been removed, but the far heavier task, healing the mind, restoring trust, was underway. The Canadian soldiers watched, not as overseers, but as witnesses to human resilience. Every gesture of care reinforced a fundamental truth. The women were human, and they were being treated as such. The frost in the courtyard remained, but inside, something warmer took root. A fragile sense of safety, a hint of possibility. Step by step, day by day, they were learning to breathe again. Not simply survive, but to exist with dignity. Inside the warmth of the room, the women gathered around wooden tables.
pens scratched across coarse paper, attempting to reach beyond the gray walls. Canadian officers encouraged them gently, guiding without insisting, allowing choice to feel like power. The act of writing became more than communication. It became reclamation, a reminder that they existed as people, with thoughts, feelings, and connections. Books appeared, stacked on rough shelves. Histories, stories, manuals, worlds beyond the barracks, lessons long denied, knowledge waiting quietly. Lessons were simple, deliberate, reading aloud, arithmetic, crafts. Each small victory built confidence. Lisa leaned over a sheet of paper, careful with every stroke of ink, proving to herself she could still act with agency. Erica traced letters with tentative precision, thinking of faces she feared were gone, of lives almost forgotten, of the chance to reclaim them. Slowly, identities stretched beyond chains, beyond cruelty and confinement. One afternoon, Lisel paused at a frost-streaked window. Her reflection surprised her. Not her face, pale, lined, winter-worn, but her eyes. Alive, curious, not merely surviving. Erica's soft smile mirrored the first glimmers of trust. Letters, books, lessons, small acts of care, each a thread reconnecting them to life. Step by step, ink by ink, lesson by lesson, they were learning to live again. Piece by piece, humanity returned. Weeks had passed since the first tentative steps into the snow-laden courtyard. Each excursion beyond the barracks carried novelty, fragile and almost impossible to grasp. A small group of women were escorted to the river, its surface fractured by ice and wind, flowing cold and relentless. The sound of moving water echoed faintly, sharp and soothing, mirroring the slow liberation of their spirits. Liesel knelt at the riverbank, fingers trembling, letting the water slip through her hands, feeling the chill bite but exhilarate, tasting life unbound by rationing or restriction. Erica crouched beside her, watching birds flit between bare trees, sunlight reflecting on frost-covered branches. The water, it feels like more than that, she whispered, a small smile tugging at frozen lips. Other women followed tentatively, testing boundaries, rediscovering choice, allowing gestures as simple as dipping fingers to become profound affirmations of freedom. The Canadian officers maintained distance, watchful, unobtrusive, ensuring safety without interference. Liesel flexed her hands in the cold. Erica pressed her palms to the river's flow, both sensing the subtle lifting of weight they had carried for months, years. Chains could bind the body, but not hope. Trust was fragile, yet growing with each step, each cautious breath, as the women realized life outside abuse was not only possible, it was beginning to exist. In the cold clarity of flowing water, something fundamental was returning. The quiet, undeniable proof that liberation was not merely absence, but reclamation of spirit, dignity, and self. Captain James O'Connor stood on the riverbank, the wind tugging at his coat, breath rising in steady plumes. From his distance, he observed the women as they moved cautiously, dipping fingers into flowing water, brushing snow from coats, exchanging quiet glances of trust slowly forming. Liesel flexed her hands, testing freedom she had almost forgotten. Erica allowed herself a slow, deliberate breath, feeling the tension in her chest ease slightly. The Canadian soldiers remained steady but unobtrusive, present without pressing, authority without intrusion. Step by step, small gestures of autonomy were reclaimed. A sleeve brushed snow away. A laugh escaped, soft and surprising, breath drawn without fear. Captain O'Connor knew the deepest scars could not vanish overnight, but dignity, patience, and respect had begun to heal wounds that no chain could conceal. Each subtle shift, each hesitant smile, was a victory not measured in strategy or firepower, but in human resilience. O'Connor watched the details others might miss: a shoulder lowered, a head lifted, a step taken without hesitation. War had taught him lessons of force. Here, restraint proved far more powerful. In that frozen camp, in the quiet of a thawing winter, humanity had begun to do what weapons could not: soften walls, mend invisible fractures, and remind even the broken that life could still carry dignity.
By spring of 1945, the barracks that had once echoed with fear were tempered by quiet rhythms of reclaimed life. Liesl Bauer and Erica Hoffman had become subtle anchors for the other women, living proof that small acts of autonomy and careful trust could spark courage even in the most beaten spirits. Women who had once remained silent, heads bowed, eyes fixed on the floor, now lifted their faces, spoke softly to one another, testing gestures of freedom without fear of punishment. The chains that had scarred wrists and souls were gone, though memory remained, an imprint of trauma no winter wind could fully erase. Fear was no longer absolute. It existed only as a shadow, diminished by deliberate acts of care. The lessons of months unfolded quietly but unmistakably. Trauma could be mitigated when dignity, patience, and humanity were afforded, even in the midst of war. Chains could bind the body, but they could never fully define a person. Kindness could restore it. Trust, once shattered, proved fragile, yet astonishingly resilient, capable of blooming when nurtured with respect. Liesl, looking at herself in a frost-streaked window, was surprised. Not her face, pale, lined, winter-worn, but her eyes, alive, curious, not merely surviving. Erica's soft smile mirrored the first glimmers of trust among the others. Letters, lessons, small acts of care, each thread reconnecting them to life. Step by step, ink by ink, lesson by lesson, they were learning to live again. Piece by piece, humanity returned. Sometimes, the most profound victories are not recorded in battle reports or maps. They occur in quiet moments when chains fall away and dignity is restored.